Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final Pitch Wars mentor video chat of the 2019 season. Tonight we have 5 middle grade mentors who are going to be answering all of your questions. So if you are watching this on Twitter, you need to click on through to YouTube in order to ask a question, and ask a question in that YouTube live chat. That is the best way to get a question to our mentors, so make sure you do that. Lee is on the Pitch Wars Twitter account today, and if she is able to, she will bring over the questions that are asked on Twitter, but there will definitely be a delay, so you want to go ahead and click through to YouTube and ask those questions directly on YouTube so we can get to them quicker. And you can go ahead and start asking questions now while I'm doing my intro so that we're ready for our mentors to answer your questions. But if you are stumbling on this video and you do not know what Pitch Wars is, you can go to pitchwars.org and find out more information about Pitch Wars. It is essentially a mentoring organization where established authors and industry professionals mentor up-and-coming writers, and there's a selective or a competitive selection process. And so that is what is starting. Our submissions open on September 25th, and they're open through 10 p.m. Eastern on September 27th. And so everyone's getting ready for that, and the mentors are going to be answering questions about that may help people get ready for those submissions. If you want to see the previous video chats that we did, you can find all of those on this playlist at bit.ly/pitchwarslive. That's just a YouTube playlist that has all the previous mentor video chats on there. And this one will also be on there as well. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to add. Wish lists are public now, so the mentors can answer questions about wish lists if they would like. They can talk about things that are on their wish list, which the first couple of chats we did, they couldn't, so it was a challenge for them. But they will not be answering anything that's a pre-query. So a pre-query is like when you pitch your entire concept and be like, is this okay? Or do you like this? One, because it's not fair, and two, because we don't want everyone pre-querying our mentors. Otherwise, there would be 1,000 pre-queries every year. And three, because it wouldn't be helpful to anyone else watching. So we're trying to help as many people as we can on these chats. So I, by the way, am Sarah Nicolas. I am the managing director for 2019 for Pitch Wars. And I was a mentor from 2012 to 2017, and I was the social media director last year, and so this year now I'm the managing director. And I am a young adult author. I'm the author of Keeping Her Secret, among other things. And I think we are ready to introduce our mentors. So we're going to start with Jessica.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me. My name is Jessica Vitalis. I am an author and freelance editor specializing in middle grade. This is my 5th year mentoring Pitch Wars, my 3rd year co-mentoring with Julie Arts as Team Unicorn Mojo, and we are just really excited to read all of your fantasy submissions.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Jennifer L. Brown. I write middle grade novels. I was a Pitch Wars mentee in 2017, and last year was my first year mentoring with Kim Long, and together we are Team Kraken Bee, and we're very, very excited for submissions next week.
Hi, I'm Mira Trahan, and this is my first year mentoring Pitch Wars. I'm mentoring along with Maria Frazier as Team Awesome Chocolate Chip Cookies. We are interested in a wide range of stuff that you can see on our wish list, and we're so excited to get submissions next week.
Hi, I'm Kara Sutton. This year I am co-mentoring with Gracie Kim. So we're Team Kiwi because we're both based in New Zealand. I was a Pitch Wars mentee in 2017, and this is both of our first year mentoring. We're really, really excited to get your middle grade submissions.
Hi, I'm Lacey Little, and this year I'm co-mentoring with Bronwyn Clark. Last year I co-mentored with Juliana Brandt, and in 2015 and 2016 I was a mentee. And Bronwyn and I don't have a team name yet because we're waiting for our mentees so we can include their input in our team name.
All right, I forgot to mention before, sometimes when I switch over from the solo to the group, it doesn't want to switch over the one layout that we're using now. And so it takes a couple seconds to switch over. I don't know why. All right, so we already have a couple of questions. So we're going to go ahead and start. Lee said, hello, ready to tweet, live tweet. So Lee is our social media director at pitchwars. So if you ever tweet at pitchwars, that's usually who you're going to be talking to. And Maria, who is one of our other mentors, she had a question that I don't think is a serious question that you don't have to answer. But why is middle grade the best? Okay, so Jay has a question. What are each of your favorite middle grade books?
Do you want us just to go in order?
Yeah, well, just whoever wants to go, just go ahead and jump in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, wow, that's such a tough question. I mean, that's like asking me to pick my favorite child, right? How about if I just name a couple that I've read recently that I love? So one would be The Line Tender, which is just such a touching, poignant, amazing story. I'm currently reading Lalani of the Distant Sea by one of our very own Pitchwars mentors, another fantastic story. But in general, I would say that Julie and I include a lot of our favorites on our wish list. So if you're interested in the stories we really love or the types of stories we love, you can go check out our wish list.
Anyone else? I think this is a particularly a middle grade problem. Is like y'all are way too nice and you never want to take over anyone else. I may have to start calling people by name.
I can go next. Yeah, I guess it is definitely a very hard question. But I would say some of the ones that I've read recently that I really, really loved were Pax by Sarah Pennypacker. Actually one that influenced my own middle grade book a lot, along with The Thickety. But then there's also just classics that it's kind of, some of them, it's hard to say whether they are middle grade or YA. Like sometimes they're considered one or the other, but like I'm a huge fan of Paul's Moving Castle or Ella Enchanted or Where Meets the Moon. So lots of fantasy, but like anything that kind of has that line between fantasy and like being really heartwarming is always kind of my favorite, I think. And then just recently I have to call out Other Words for Home and Planet Earth is Blue were two of my favorite recent reads, just phenomenal. So yeah. Sorry, I just named like 10 books.
Classically, I love Diana Wynne Jones. She's my absolute favorite. I'm working on reading through all of her books, and I think I have about 10 left to go. But more recently, I have absolutely loved Witchwood and Furthermore. They are two of my absolute favorite fantasy books recently. And also recently, I read The Miscalculations of Lightning Girl and read it in like an entire evening because I couldn't put it down. The voice was just fantastic. It was a great book.
I'm a big fan of The Lost Girls, which I just read by Anne Ursu, and kind of anything by her. In fantasy, I mean, there's a huge range, but recently I've read the books in the Serpent series, the Serpent Secret series by Santhani Dasgupta. And circling back to my co-mentor's question, Maria, an excellent question. I think one reason middle grade is the best because you can hear from all our answers, there's such a range and there's so much you can do. I think it speaks to an age where so much is happening and people are in such different places that there's so many great stories that can come out of that time. So
I guess I'll answer. I don't know if I was being polite or if I was just stressing about the question. Yeah, I think my answer right now is going to be woefully incomplete. I love so many middle grade books with such a passion. Furthermore is definitely on my little, when we had to, our mentor profiles had 5 books because I love it. I just finished reading The Parker Inheritance finally, and it was just this beautiful twisty-turny mystery and reminded me of The Weston Game, which was one of my favorite books as a kid. I just read The Great Treehouse War by Lisa Graff, which I also thought was so fun and told the story in so many different styles. But what else? The Mad Wolf's Daughter. I feel like I could just list books for a while, but yeah, so those are some.
I think we could probably go just for the whole hour, just y'all mentioning the books that you like. All right, so we have a question from Andrea. Hi, I've been looking at the wish list and posts from mentors, and some mentioned they are looking for a quote strong voice end quotes. Any recommendation on what this looks like?
I've got some thoughts here, I guess. So I feel like voice is something that people tend to stress about a lot. And part of that is because it's so difficult to define. Like people always say that that they're looking for a strong voice, and everybody always goes, but what does that mean? And for years, what I interpret that as meaning was I thought that it meant that I needed to have like you know how in Lemony Snicket, he's always like making these asides and kind of being a bit snarky about the characters or things like that. That was what I thought a strong voice meant. And so for years, I imitated that and really struggled because that wasn't what my natural voice was. So to me, like what ends up ultimately happening is like your voice is just you in like, and how you write, but in a way that shows that you've done your work and have like refined how you've written. Like to me, like a strong voice ultimately ends up coming through when somebody has just been practicing writing for a long time and they've figured out what techniques work for them, and they've figured out all those things that you learn, like showing, not telling, or when to show versus tell. Things like how to pick strong verbs, you know, versus relying on adjectives all the time. Like it's all these, it's just basically how you as a unique individual interpret those writing techniques that you've heard over the years. And that just tends to come through. Like you just tend to, as someone who, when you're in the library and you pick up a lot of books, you can look at the first page and see like, oh, this has kind of a sweet voice, or oh, this is really comedic, or oh, this is really fast paced. You can just kind of see, I think Chuck Wendig called it their thumbprints on the page. And but yeah, to me it's just about focusing on writing technique, and ultimately that voice will come through.
So I would just like to piggyback on that and go a little deeper and say, for me, voice really comes down to the lens through which the character sees the world. And so I think really strong voices depict everything that the writer knows about the character and how they filter that into the writing. So for example, The Remarkable Adventures of Coyote Sunrise, I think the author Dan did just a fantastic job of using Coyote's experience as a child traveling the country in a bus with her dad to form how she sees the world and how she speaks and how she interprets everything around her. So I think that you can choose books like that and study them and just really think about what formed your character. What sorts of things would be in their conscious as you're forming metaphors. A child who's never been to the ocean is not going to use a metaphor about the ocean, most likely. So yeah, I guess to me, that's really what comes through most strongly in voice, is how the character sees the world.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to piggyback on that too, one of my favorite examples of a great voice is Howard Wallace PI, because it's a great novel. And it's wonderfully told. And this kid, if you don't know it, he wants to be a detective in like an old gumshoe Humphrey Bogart way. And so everything that he speaks about is so specific. I also think the Candy Makers came to mind, which is a book that's told in 4 POVs, and you can just open to any page and immediately know which character's brain you're in, because I don't want to spoiler any of the things about the characters, but you can just the hobbies they have inform their writing and inform the metaphors they use. Rajani Laraka, who's a middle grade mentor this year too, her book Midsummer Mayhem, Mimi, her main character, talks about food so much because she's a baker, and a lot of her metaphors are like in the kitchen. and it just feels, and her siblings are musicians, and that informs the way she speaks specifically. So I think that, especially if you're looking for a window in, it's like, what is my character like? Where do they live? What do they do? What are their hobbies? Because that's probably how they talk.
And piggybacking on what everyone else is saying, I do think sometimes if you're working on voice, doing a lot of free writes from your character's perspective can help you just get, those phrases that Jennifer was talking about, or that knowledge of character that Jessica was talking about. So even apart from, sometimes it can be hard when you're starting to tell the story in the character's voice because you have so much pressure, but just practicing saying anything in who you know this character will be, and then it'll be much easier to actually tell the story itself in their voice.
All right, so Shane asks, for mentors requesting fantasy but have said they aren't interested in Lord of the Rings-like stories, which include elves, dwarves, etc., are you still accepting other high fantasy manuscripts? Does that apply to any of you? Okay, go ahead. Jennifer, you're muted. Yeah.
I'm muted. I figured it out. So yeah, Kim and I wrote something like that on our wish list. Last year, we got a lot of submissions with like very common, typical fantasy characters, and they were all and a lot of them were told in a way where we could kind of predict what was going to happen next, because all of these, the unicorns looked exactly how you think a unicorn would look in your brain, or a dwarf looked exactly in a very similar, like, Tolkien described dwarves just like this way in your brain. So I think what Kim and I meant on our wish list is that it's not like we hate dwarves or we hate elves, because that's definitely not the case. I think it's we're interested in stories unusually told, and these characters written in ways that we haven't seen them written before. So yeah, we love high fantasy, and if it's told in a new way, great. And if you make up a creature on your own, even better. I think that's why we're Team Kraken Bee. But yeah, new twists on old favorites is definitely cool. And I mentioned Mad Wolf's Daughter. That feels very high fantasy, well, at least historical and grand. So yeah.
I just want to jump in and say that Jennifer's answer was perfect. I think it's completely applicable to Julie and I too. We just are looking for something unique, something we haven't seen before.
Yeah, similarly for us, it's just about like sometimes, so I used to work at a film company that actually designed the sets for Lord of the Rings. I worked for What a Workshop, and so surrounded by these people who world building was their job and their passion. And world building is something that I think is really important, but sometimes sometimes people who get really, really excited about the world can let that overpower the plot and the characters, or don't necessarily, or like that's the main thing that we're trying to kind of, we're hoping to not avoid, but like we want to make sure that you've thought about all of the things and not just the world, which is what Lord of the Rings is kind of the perfect example of, is that it's really about the world more than it's about the story necessarily. Some people might hate me for that, but that's kind of, but I mean, world is really what makes that series amazing. And so we're just looking for that balance of like, of world, but in how it shapes the characters and their motivations, and keeping characters as the focus. And yeah, agree. Like, just trying to do things that haven't been seen before, or at least just having a new twist on some of these favorite tropes that really show that you're not just kind of regurgitating what you've seen before, but that you're kind of pushing yourself creatively, I guess.
Anybody else want to add? Okay, next question. Sorry I flashed this question on the screen earlier. My touchpad is really sensitive, so I didn't even realize I had tapped it. For the main character age ranges, middle grade is often shown up to 12 years old, but young adult main characters generally start at 14 years. So where do 13-year-old protagonists go? Is 13 too old for middle grade?
My Pitchwars 2016 manuscript, when I was a mentee, both of my protagonists were 13. And after I queried it, I only had one agent that didn't like them to be 13. So, I mean, I know that was about 2 years ago, but it doesn't seem to me that 13 is not a bad age for a protagonist in middle grade to me.
I would say that 13 is absolutely fine as long as it fits the themes of the story. If you're writing a middle grade with themes or a voice geared more toward the younger audience, then obviously 13 is going to be problematic. But if you're writing more of an upper middle grade story, then 13 is right in the range. And worst case scenario, if an editor loves your story, maybe they'll want you to age it down to 12. But there shouldn't be a real big difference. And certainly having a 13-year-old protagonist is not a deal breaker.
Yeah, I think as long as the 13-year-old is still dealing with typical middle grade problems, everything's fine. I think, I think if they're very much like dealing with like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of YA, then like maybe it skews up. But if they're still in middle school and like dealing with friendship problems and finding a place in their community or family or something like that, that all feels really middle grade. My work in progress as a 13-year-old in it. She's getting ready for her bat mitzvah. So, and it's a very middle grade story. So I think we're cool.
All right. Well, the YA I just finished drafting does not have sex, drugs, or rock and roll. So I'm wondering if I did it wrong.
You're writing middle grade.
Yeah.
Maybe it's middle grade. No. Okay. So Lee brought us a question from Twitter, and this seems like a good time to remind you, if you tuned in a little bit late, if you want to ask us a question, the best way to do that is by going to the YouTube, clicking on through to the YouTube live page and asking a question in the YouTube live chat there. Otherwise, it may be a little delayed before your question gets to us. So if you're watching, embedded on Twitter, you can go ahead and click through to YouTube. Lee asks from Shannon on Twitter, what's the best for middle grade readers, first person or third? And we actually have a follow-up question to that from Jay, and so I'm going to have y'all talk about both at the same time. Jumping off the first or third question, what about present or past tense?
Okay, yeah, I've got feelings on this one. So, first and third, like, there's not one that's better. It's just a matter of, like, not objectively better. It's just a matter of what's better for the manuscript. And there's a huge number of factors that can impact why a manuscript might be better suited to first versus third. Like, first can be just like amazingly emotional. You're really in the character's head. You really feel the character and their thoughts and their motivations very, very clearly. Sometimes it can be a little more challenging presenting that in third person. Third also, but third might also affect how other characters are described. So, with first, you're really definitely only seeing through the narrator's lens, whereas third, sometimes you can step back a little bit. Like, usually in third, you're writing third person close rather than like a third person omniscient, which is really, really hard to pull off. So you're still often seeing through that protagonist's lens, but you can step back a little bit more. You have a little more flexibility there. So it's just a matter of what works best for your story. Like my upcoming middle grade book is written in third, and that was because I wanted to give it kind of a fairy tale story being told by the fireside kind of feel. I also am just not particularly good at writing in first person myself, but I love reading it. And as for present versus past, one of the reasons why I wanted to answer this was because I submitted my manuscript to Pitchwars twice, and before I got in 2017. And the first year that I submitted it, mine was written in third person present, which is a very unusual tense, and I actually got a lot of pushback on it. I had a lot of people saying, nope, no way, just don't even write a book in third person present, which like kind of broke my heart a little bit because there's books like Wolf Hall which is not middle grade, but like there are books that use third person present beautifully, because like if you think about how you tell a story by the fireside, you do tend to tell it in third person present. But I ended up, because I was getting so much pushback on it, I did end up changing it, and found that, at least in my situation, third person past worked better for me. But it is something to keep in mind, is that because present tense is very unusual in third person, but pretty common in first person. I think The Hunger Games is written in first person present tense, and now it's like you see it kind of everywhere. But it's not that you shouldn't do it. Like, I think definitely do what's best for your story. But sometimes it can throw people a little bit if they see third person present rather than first person present. Yeah, so that's, again, though, it's just a matter of what's best for your story.
And I would add, that's not really something you need to worry about, particularly for Pitch Wars, in the sense that if we have an issue with one of those elements, it's something we'll help you work on and revise. So you don't have to make that decision before you submit to us, for sure.
I know in the past there's been people that have switched their entire manuscript from third to first, or from first to third, or from present to past, or past to present in Pitch Wars, like during the revision time. So if it's a problem, but we still love your book, we'll make you change it all the way.
And one thing you can think about, I agree with everything been said, and I know a lot of times not a lot, but at least there have been switches. And if you're willing to do the work, it's fine and it can be great. Also with past and present, sometimes think about how reflective your character is, or how much you want them to reflect, because if you want a lot of that, it's really hard to do that in present. I actually personally almost always do my first draft in present, just because I'm like, what's happening here? And then in later drafts, I might switch it to past, or might not, depending on the characters and what fits. But that is something that can be changed.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said so far. I write in first and third, depending on the story. I would say that for me, one of the things that I know that I have to write in first person is if I find my narrator funny and my narrator's making jokes, I find that so much easier in first person. And if the story has a slightly more classical feel, or it's more fantasy, like my writing tends to like kind of just drift into third person. And that's usually where those stories wind up. But so I guess jokes, if you're doing jokes, first person is sometimes easier.
Anyone else? Okay. I didn't, the book I just finished, actually, I had started writing it in third person, but the main character has anxiety, and I really wanted to like show what that was like, and I felt like that was a lot stronger in first person, so I ended up switching it over. Okay. We have another question that seems very difficult. I don't know how to answer this. Is character voice as important as writer voice in your process to pick a mentee?
That is a tough question. Yeah. I think for me, I kind of want the writer voice to disappear for the most part. There are exceptions, of course, where the writer voice is a super important part of the story, but I think when writer voice is done really well, you don't necessarily notice it in the craft sense, in terms of just writing style, word choice, sentence structure. So that's super important. Those are all basic elements that we're really looking for to be mastered, because I think that's something that we can't teach in the short window we have for Pitch Wars, whereas it's the character voice that's going to jump out at us and we're going to fall in love with it. So they're both really, really super important, and I wouldn't say one is more important than the other for Pitch Wars purposes. They're just different.
Email?
Well, did you have something, Kara?
Oh, no, nothing to add.
Okay. I was just going to say, To me, writer voice is something that you see over the course of many books. Like however you pick up a Maggie Stiefvater book and you know that it's written by her, or like with Diana Wynne Jones, you can pick up any of her books, whatever character they are, and you can tell it's her writing. So to me, it's not as important for just Pitch Wars because we're only doing one of your books at the time.
All right.
Sorry, one final thought.
Go ahead, Kara.
I do think it applies to that first versus third person question as well, because like a third person manuscript might feel a little bit more like an author voice than a character voice. Not necessarily, but it might. So it for me personally, because I don't have a preference for the point of view, or like I think it could go either way. Like a manuscript could have a stronger author voice or a stronger character voice. I would say that author voice, if you're going for something like an omniscient narrator or like a removed narrator, that can sometimes just be harder to pull off. So if you're doing something that's like really present in the manuscript. But yeah, I agree with what's been said before about that the author voice is often something that you tend to notice more across several manuscripts than necessarily across one.
All right, so we had a follow-up question to the POV question, so I jumped ahead a little bit. My manuscript is in third person, but throughout the book, the main character has direct thoughts, I'm assuming in italics. Do you think that's okay? I feel like that's pretty standard, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess as long as they're, I was thinking, so I was trying to think if they would be in first person or third person, but it's always first person.
Yeah.
First and probably present too. If you're writing in third past, those thoughts are probably in first present because they're happening in the moment for the character. So it's like dialogue usually.
I feel like that's pretty standard too.
Yeah. All right. So Jay has a question that is very specific to Jay. So if y'all could answer this in a way that would also help people who are kind of in a similar situation. I've written a young adult novel that I want to convert to middle grade. I have a solid plan for this, but only one sample chapter converted. Would I be able to pitch this project? And if so, how?
Oh, I can answer that question. Our mentor last year was in this situation. She had written a dragon fantasy that was multiple point of view, very definitely a YA story, and she wanted to rewrite it. She knew that she needed to rewrite it into middle grade. So she rewrote a portion of it, sent us the first chapter, pitched it as a middle grade, and then as part of our Pitch Wars revision, we did all of the work to switch it to middle grade. So she basically rewrote her entire novel from scratch. She eliminated, I think, 3 point of views. We completely revamped the plot. Of course, the themes were different. She literally rewrote her manuscript from scratch. So yeah, if you want to do that, just go ahead and mention it in your query letter that that's what you're doing so that the mentors know what they're getting themselves into. But if they fall in love with your story and they're willing to put in the work, then that's not a problem.
Yeah, I've done that with one of my books. It's tough, and usually YA is a lot longer. So especially if you wrote like a YA fantasy, and you're trying to make it a middle grade fantasy, just know that probably 30,000 words have to go. So if you're strong of heart and are willing to do it,
I think Tiffany cut 20 or 30,000 words, and she pretty much gave up on sleeping also. So just you have to be prepared to do the work.
Yeah, I mean, my co-mentor Gracie has done this as well. Her debut that was just announced with Rick Riordan Presents actually started out as a YA book that she changed over into middle grade. So it's definitely something that happens. But yeah, I would, as a former Pitch Wars mentee myself, I would just say like sometimes some feedback can be a lot more labor intensive than others. So just make sure that you're taking care of yourself if that's what you want to do during the Pitch Wars revision period.
And do all your laundry before you get your edit letter. Wash everything in your house. That's my biggest piece of advice. Because you won't have time. Do all your errands.
Load up on crock pot meals also.
Oh, yes.
Crock pot recipes. Outsource your children.
All right. So to let the viewers know, we have one question left before we run out of questions. So make sure to get your questions in, so that we have something for our mentors to answer. But I have a couple questions for them if those questions lag a little bit. So we're not going to just have like dead silence for a while. Don't worry about that. From Ariana on Twitter, for any, what is the maximum word count you would personally suggest for a chapter in a middle grade book?
I am really bad at writing the world's longest chapter.
Me too.
I just edited a chapter yesterday, and it was 2,701 words. And I was like, I mean, I try to keep mine to about 2,000. That's my goal. But obviously, some of them go over, and they're just going to go over. I like probably anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 is what I try to strive for myself personally.
Oh, I'm also really bad at this. But when I was a mentee, my mentor, one of the things we talked about in our second round of edits, she was like, your book is going to be in the hands of kids one day, we hope, and kids get assigned to read chapters for homework, so they will get a little mad at you if your chapter's 20 pages, especially if the last one was 5 and the next one was 20. So like consistent chapter length is ideal, and just like keep in mind that an 8-year-old might be reading it, so try not to hurt the 8-year-old spirit.
I think when I'm thinking about chapter length, it's exactly what Jennifer said. So it's more about sort of keeping it consistent throughout the book or using it to affect the pacing if you're trying to work with it that way. But I tend to think more in scenes. So what's the character's scene goal? What's their want? What do they want to happen? And what actually happens in the chapter? And once you get there, then your chapter's probably over. And if it's too long, then that's a signal that you need to go in and look and say, okay, where would be an interesting place to break this chapter where I can end it on a high emotional note, or I can end it on a cliffhanger so that my readers will keep reading.
Right. Usually if your chapter's too short or too long, you might have some pacing issues. So that's always kind of a good tip to go back and see if you can fix one of those things and find a better place to end it, or more things to put into the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I would just add to that, like, this isn't something that would be a rejection point. Like, hopefully you're asking this as far as just general writing advice rather than like, how can I refine my manuscript for Pitch Wars? Because to be honest, like if I'm reading and I'm really enjoying reading and I'm excited about reading, your chapter length is probably not something I'm going to be thinking about all that much. It's just something that I think I would be looking at in terms of, the thinking of the final end product that children will be reading once we're revising.
Yeah, and my daughter, I was just saying, my daughter, she wants longer chapters because I always tell her I'll read her one chapter before bed and she'll be really mad if the chapters are short.
Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Oh, all I was going to say is we're all adults. Like all the mentors are adults. So and submissions are soon, and we're also excited about that. So I just don't want any of you to be spending the next 5 days being like, oh no, all my chapters have to be of consistent length. Like everyone probably has advice of what you could do in these next 5 days, but I think none of our advice would be to do that. Just like let it live, I think probably at this point. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I thought of something while you were saying that. So the submission form, the character limit on the submission form for the first chapter, it's pretty long, and so you could probably put up to like 10,000 words in there. And we did see a couple people last year who definitely put like their first 4 chapters in there. And don't do that just because there's room. Only put your first chapter in there. And it doesn't help you. Some people are like, oh, if I give them more, maybe that will help. But actually what it does is it just tells the mentor that you don't know how to follow basic like rules. So don't do that for sure, no matter how long your chapters are. All right. Ellen asks, do you plan to read the entire writing sample for all of your submissions?
Yeah. Yeah, I think first chapters are hard. I think queries are hard too. And writing a query is a whole separate art form, and it doesn't necessarily reflect how good your book is. In fact, oftentimes it doesn't. Kim and I last year looked at pages first more often than not, and sometimes things take a little bit to get going. A lot of people start their books in the wrong place, either a scene too early or a scene too late. So you kind of want to give it its full opportunity to see like actually what's going on and to get a sense of the style. So yeah.
Same. The only thing that we don't read all of is the synopsis. Usually we only turn to the synopsis if we're really intrigued by the opening pages, and then we'll turn to the synopsis to just sort of get a feel for what the rest of the story is about.
But yeah, us too. The synopsis, I think last year we read them only if we were like, the query seems to be telling one story and the chapter seems to be telling a really different story. And then the synopsis was like a nice arbiter of like, what actually are we going to be getting ourselves into here?
Yeah, we definitely plan to read everything, but with what Jennifer and Jessica said, with the synopsis probably coming after the pages in the query.
Yeah, I definitely like to read all the pages that are included, because even with published books, sometimes it takes me a while to get into the voice or the setting or whatever the writer is saying. So I like to, even with published books, give them a chance to read through like a couple of chapters. So I would definitely, with a submission, read through the whole chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the only reason why I was hesitant to give like a definite yes is just because if there's a book that has like flagrantly disregarded our wish list, then maybe not. But you know, that would have to be like an egregious disregard, you know, not like how high fantasy is high fantasy. It's like, you know, submitting us YA or something, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like but yeah, otherwise I agree. It's like these are pre-published books, you know, not everything is going to be perfectly polished, so we want to make sure that we're giving everyone their full chance.
I will say that one year I had somebody track down my personal email account, and they submitted both via the formal route and then also submitted to me personally. And that was an auto reject. I did not read any of the pages. So please don't do that. Just follow the instructions.
Yeah. Because yeah, the main reason why I think that's important is it's like, this is, we're preparing you for publication, not just in your writing skills, but in your navigation of the publishing industry as a whole.
That's
and
right.
do stuff like that, like agents are not going to tolerate it.
Yeah.
Like probably, you know, they get thousands more submissions than we do, and it's just not acceptable.
That's right. Well, and you're showing us that you don't have an understanding of boundaries, much less professionalism. So,
right.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that, Kara, because I was going to say, yeah, caveat, if it's like completely off of, it's, you know, something they specifically said do not want, then it probably won't get a read. And also if it's something just inherently problematic, if the concept itself is problematic, I feel like most mentors won't read that as well. And I also want to say, don't let, they were obviously very kind in their answers, but don't let that like give you permission to not edit your first couple of pages. Because I feel like sometimes people are asking that question, not Ellen particularly, but sometimes people are asking that question because they want permission to like not work on the first chapter. Like, don't do that, you know? All right, so Geeky Acrylics has another question for us. Superhero novels, what's the best way to categorize them? Mine is set in the modern real world, so should I just say contemporary superhero or contemporary fantasy? Seems like a gray area.
So my mentee from 2 years ago had superhero elements in her novel. I'm trying to remember how we pitched it. I'm pretty sure it was just pitched as contemporary fantasy or maybe even straight fantasy. I feel like the superhero elements are going to be apparent in the query itself, so you don't necessarily need to call that out in the pitch.
Okay, sounds good. I don't think we have superhero necessarily listed. So the genres this year, it's a little change, are where the actual genre like field is going to be drop down instead of fill in. And the reason why, the sole reason for that is to make statistics easier for us, because we would get completely like unstandard, genres, which makes it really hard. I had to like go through and literally manually check every like 3,400 genre category. And so I don't think we have a superhero one listed. And so in that case, I would say whatever it is behind the driving, force behind your what makes your superhero a superhero, whether you're going to go like towards the sci-fi or towards the contemporary fantasy area. Okay, so Cal asks, oh, my window jumped. Cal asks, what if the first chapter is only 5 pages? This is actually answered on our submission FAQ. So this is a great opportunity for me to say before you submit, make sure you go and read the About Pitch Wars page and also the submission FAQ, because there are so many questions that people ask that are actually answered there. And so the answer here is if your first chapter is short, you can submit up to 10 pages. So it's first chapter or 10 pages, whichever is longer, essentially. All right, so we are out of questions from viewers, but I'm sure some will roll in now that I have said that. But I have a question for you. So what are some of your tips for making the query letter as compelling as possible?
Query Shark. Query Shark was just the godsend for me learning how to write queries. I mean, not every rule that she kind of gives is a must do, but the more you read of Query Shark, the more you kind of see what works and what doesn't. You just start to pick up on why certain things work. And then, the other thing that she just is very forceful about is always listing your stakes in the query. Yeah, I'd say do that. And also take advantage of the Pitchwars forums, because people post their queries in there and mentors go in and, including myself, give feedback. There's lots of resources out there for people giving feedback on your query as well. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid that someone's going to steal your pitch or something. Get feedback.
One thing I think is really important in querying is showing us your story and what specifically makes your story unique. I think it's really easy to say, something really broad like, bad things will happen, but being really specific about what bad things. And obviously they have to be short, but even a little taste of what makes this character an individual really goes a long way, I think, in a query. Make sure sort of at the end of that paragraph or 2 or 3, we have a sense of it won't be mistaken for any other middle grade story.
I think another common mistake too is that people tend to treat the query like a synopsis, and they'll try to fit too much into the query. So keep it short. You really just want to introduce us to the character, the problem, conflict, the stakes. In other words, what really makes this story matter? What happens if the main character doesn't reach his or her goal? Why should we read this? Why is it compelling? So once you've answered those things, just quick in, quick out. You don't need to tell us the ending. You don't need to tell us about every single plot point.
Yeah, that goes for world building too. We don't want, it's so cool to know about the world building, but I feel like sometimes, especially in a fantasy query, they're like, well, let me tell you all about how magic works. And you're like, this is not the moment. Like, main character, what do they want? What kind of person are they? What's going to prevent them from getting what they want? Either like physical obstacles or mental obstacles, or hopefully both. And yeah. But yeah, don't if you feel like you're saying too many character names or too many rules of the world, there's a time for that, but the query is not the time for that.
One thing that I've found, if this isn't a hard and fast rule by any means, but if you're struggling a little bit, something that can be helpful that I did learn from Query Shark was try focusing on just the first act, because if you have a lot of world building, if your query is feeling overly complicated, if that's feedback that you're getting a lot, sometimes that can be a thing that helps, is trying to just focus on the stakes and problems that occur in the first act rather than the book as a whole. That's definitely not a hard and fast rule. I've seen plenty of queries that have used that to good effect, and plenty that have not done that and have been great. But I just found that personally, when I was writing my queries, I found that very helpful advice because it helped me to kind of hone in on just those characters and just the stakes. And sometimes it can just provide a bit of clarity because it can feel really overwhelming to distill an entire book down into 250 words.
Yeah. Also trade with people, trade queries with people, post on the forum, like Kara said, especially people who haven't read your book, because if they've read your book, they're gonna be like, oh, I get what she's like, I get what he or she is like shortening and trying to cut to the heart of. But if a person doesn't know your story, particularly if there's some sort of speculative element that you're trying to describe in one sentence, run that by a bunch of people.
Okay, Lacey lost her audio. Are you back?
I am back.
Okay, cool, good. Anyone else have anything to add about queries? Okay. Daniel asks, is there such a thing as too advanced world building for middle grade? I only ever see our world with extra fantasy stuff. And there was quite a bit of good conversation about world building when someone asked the question about Lord of the Rings style fantasy. So if you didn't see that, Daniel, I would recommend you go and watch that too, but I will let our mentors go ahead and answer that question. Nobody has anything?
I mean, both Lacey and I talked about Furthermore, and that is not in our world, and it's so rich and so detailed. Her books are just gorgeous, but I think that that's a really good example of a book with a lot of world building. It's kind of sort of, I don't want to use based on Alice in Wonderland, but it's like inspired by an Alice-like story. And she starts in a world that's not her own and travels to another world that's not our own. So I think, and that's done really beautifully. So I think it's possible to have a ton of world building. You just kind of have to use it, hopefully, to reveal character and not because it's just cool.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well. And definitely read Furthermore and Witchwood. They're just absolutely amazing stories. Yeah, among my very favorites. But I think the real trick is to present it in such a way that it feels organic to the story and organic to the character's journey. So if it starts to feel like it's info dumping or you're having to spend a whole bunch of time just explaining the world, then that becomes problematic. But if, again, you're going back to the lens through which the character sees the world, so you can't, this is a really bad example, but if you had some bizarre word for toaster, you would never have your character say that word and then stop and say, this is a toaster. They would just use that word and then they would describe like, you know, oh, I hope it doesn't burn my toast this time, to make it clear what it is without you having to constantly stop and tell the reader. So that's what I mean when I say organic to the world building. As long as you can find lots of organic ways to fit the world building in to keep the reader interested and have it not feel info dumpy, then it's not a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's that info dumpy thing that is just trying to be avoided. And it was something I meant to mention in that earlier world building discussion, and then I forgot. But I mean, several of the books that we've mentioned, several of the ones I mentioned as my favorites, are not technically set in this world, but they feel really familiar. I mean, The Thickety, or Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, or The Girl Who Drank the Moon, another one. I mean, Newbery Award-winning middle grade book that is definitely, you know, feels familiar, but isn't really set in our world exactly. But yeah, it's that vocabulary that I think just has to be handled delicately if that's the case. Like if you're needing to if you're needing to introduce a lot of made up concepts and a lot of made up words in the first couple chapters in order to get people to even understand what the characters care about, then that can just get really tricky and can make the manuscript feel quite weighted down. Yeah, I feel like that's the thing, that's the balance that you're trying to find, is what information can I introduce, how little information can I introduce to, at least at the beginning, and how can I trickle it in order to help people identify with the characters first and or understand what's going on without having to have all this information just dumped on them.
Yeah, I agree with Kara totally. I think it's about having a judicious hand and like world building stuff because it's great if you know a ton, but you as the authors are always going to know more than what appears on the page. So it's about sprinkling in stuff slowly and only when it's necessary and adds to what's happening in the moment.
All right. We have a very important question from Maria Fraser again. Which fantasy creature would you most want to meet?
I'm going to start with a griffin. I feel like griffins are underrepresented in fantasy. I think that they historically have been represented as super smart. So I think it would be really fun to meet a griffin.
I think my answer's been the same since I was like 10. I read The Golden Compass for the first time. And I think my answer is everything from the book, but I definitely want to meet a giant armored polar bear. I definitely want to meet my daemon and know who they are. We can have long conversations about this later, but I think that's my answer. And it hasn't changed.
I think Jessica was like looking at her bookshelf.
That's exactly. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm like, how could I pick just one? So I don't know. Does Willa of the Wood count as a fantasy character? She's the main character. She's amazing. She's so cool. I would love to meet her. Crenshaw. I mean, how cool would it be to meet a crazy cat like Crenshaw? That would be super cool. Anything from Harry Potter, of course. I'd be happy to meet any fantasy character.
There's so many, but I would say the Demon Queen from The Serpent's Secret, because I love the idea of a super feminist villain who complains about how her children are giving her heartburn and can, swallow galaxies.
Yeah, I find this really hard. I have to agree. I always had like I agree that griffins are kind of underrepresented. I think they're really cool, and yeah, and I have to agree about the Golden Compass, like meeting a demon and an armored bear. I guess in terms of meeting like the dragons from the Enchanted Forest Chronicles would be pretty cool. I'm not a big dragon person personally. I mean, like sometimes it depends. Like I wouldn't say I don't love dragons, but like a dragon has to have a lot of personality for me to get really excited. But the other kind of creature that I always like appealed to me were centaurs. I guess just because they're horses. I don't know.
Yeah.
That I guess that would be maybe the other one that I would be interested to meet, because I always loved how like intellectual they are, but also horses.
I would want to meet is it Fenestra from Nevermore, the giant cat?
Oh.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I want to meet her specifically because she seems awesome.
Good answer.
All right. Okay. So we have one more question, and then we're going to stop taking questions from the viewers. And I have one question that I've been asking in almost every video chat that I would like y'all to answer, and then we'll close out. So Jay asked, do you think there's a market for our own voices, middle grade, about adopted children? If so, what challenges would be acceptable for the age group? Asking for a friend. I think Jay means this literally. I think they're actually asking for a friend.
I mean, I think that's definitely a great topic to explore for middle grade. And I think, off the top of my head, I can't think of any challenges that wouldn't be appropriate. I think so much of middle grade is just how you handle things and how you discuss things. But I think the most important thing would just be try to be honest and tell your truth in this story, as opposed to thinking, oh, I can't say this because I'm writing for kids. So I think it's great.
I love the Green Glass House series, the main character is adopted, and that's not Own Voices. But I would love to read an Own Voices account of adoption, because I imagine that is a huge thought process to go through, especially as you become a middle grader. And so I think that would be a great thing to read and to write.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's very little. I mean, well, no, I can't say that as a blanket statement, but like, kids can handle a lot, and kids are put through a lot. So in terms of blanket topics, it's all about just how it's handled, in terms of whether or not something is appropriate for middle grade. And yeah, I mean, so many children are adopted, and I would love to see that from an Own Voices perspective.
Great. Jay said, yes, literally, I want my friend to write a book.
You should do it, Jay's friend. Write it.
I was actually looking up my question to the fantasy creature question, because I couldn't remember the character's name, but it's Kamala, who's a flesh-eating horse demon in Rashni Chokchi's The Star-Touched Queen, which is a beautiful book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved Kamala when I read it. I was like, oh, I want one. All right, so my question I've been asking in every chat is, what is your favorite resource for writers, whether it's like a blog or a book or a podcast or anything like that? We can just go in order. We'll start with Mira.
My favorite writing book is Steering the Craft by Ursula Le Guin, and I think it's fantastic. One, she's just awesome, and it's almost like having coffee with this amazing woman when you read the book. It's so personal, but also she really gets into the nitty-gritty of things like sentence structure and word choice. I feel like there's a lot of great craft books out there that talk about story arc, and that's super important. But as we've all said, we can kind of help fix plot and this and that. But if you need in your toolbox, to be able to vary your sentences, to be able to pick those strong verbs, all of those things. And it's a book that helps me the most with my writing. And sort of when I'm having a bad writing day, it's the book I sort of go back to. And in my last mentor relationship, I bought that book for my mentee when we were working on point of view, because she has the best writing exercises on point of view and different types of third and first and some of the things we've talked about here. So I love Steering the Craft by Ursula Le Guin. And in terms of podcasts, Neil Kerr's podcast, which now suddenly I'm blanking on the name of, I'm Keeping a Notebook. I really like that one too.
Kara?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've got, it's hard to pick just one, but I tend to return a lot to KM Weiland's website, which I think, what is it? Helping Writers Become Authors?
I think so.
Yeah. So, and she has several books out, which are all very, very helpful. Also, Cheryl Klein's The Magic Words is really marvelous. And Mary Cole's Kidlit, I think it's kidlit.com. She's a former agent who also has a book called Writing Irresistible Kidlit. That was one of the first craft books that I read and found it just extraordinarily helpful. I don't actually, it's a huge gap in my podcast listening as far as craft podcasts go. But I do tend to watch a lot of craft YouTube channels as well. There's a channel called Just Right. There's a lot of ones about filmmaking as well, but that definitely applies to writing also. Lessons from the Screenplay is just phenomenal. Or Lindsay Ellis's YouTube, or Patrick H. Willems. These are all YouTubers who tend to talk about story structure specifically, which I've just found enormously helpful. So I guess in terms of craft, there's kind of a difference between the actual prose writing and the actual narrative design, both of which I think are very important things to study. But yes, so I recommend all of those things. Yeah.
I definitely second the KM Weiland website. because she is amazing to walk you through things, and she uses examples from movies, and which is really helpful to me. So I always send, if you have structure issues, especially, to go look at her website. But I also like to read through Maggie Stivatter's blog, her old blog posts, because she does such a good job talking about voice and talking about manipulating your reader's emotions and just all of those things that are, like, to me, like second level in the craft and harder to pick up on your own when you're reading, because it's done so much sort of like behind the scene in between the lines. And so I really like to read her posts because I feel like she does a good job helping you see the sort of like magic of writing, of how you can pull together a bunch of elements to create what you want your readers to feel.
And Jennifer?
God, this is really, I'm very bad at favorites, but I will say the two books that I tend to return to most often or recommend most often, Save the Cat, which I think is a very great, especially if you have no idea about narrative structure and you're hearing people like today say like first act and you're like, what? Save the Cat is a very bare bones rundown of like, this is how you structure, which is really, really helpful. They give a lot of examples from movies. And I think it was the first book I read where I was like, oh, I understand what we're talking about now. Because I think some books you pick up a craft book and they're expecting you to kind of know that already, or have a feel for it. And then the book that I return to in my writing a lot is Story Genius by Lisa Crone. It like kind of blew my mind the first time I read it. She is, especially if you're having issues with the emotional arc of your character, her whole thing, and she says it in much more beautiful words than I'm about to say, is that the character's emotional arc should be driving your plot as opposed to the way a lot of writers write, which is to think of cool plot things and then have the character's emotions kind of follow that. So it's a way of crafting your book from the beginning where the emotional heart of your character is like the driving beat of the novel. And I'm trying to think, so I love Story Genius, and Kim likes another emotional arc book, Kim Long, my co-mentor, and I can't remember the name of it right now for the life of me, but I will tweet it later because I think those two books really work well in tandem together. She's going to be so disappointed in me, but I'll get back to you.
All right, so I'm going to jump on this Story Genius bandwagon. As Jennifer said, it's just a really amazing book for digging deep into the internal arc and emotions of your character. I would say to actually encourage people to go ahead and do the exercises, because I read it the first time and I thought, oh, okay, I get it, thanks. And I don't know that I necessarily internalized her tips. And so then I went through and I worked through it again, and I got about halfway through with my story and I thought, okay, I've got it, thanks, I'm good now. And it wasn't until I took a third story and worked all the way through it that I felt like you really do have to go through all the exercises to get the full benefit of tying your plot into the character arc. So I really encourage people to work through that book. I would also say if you're sort of just getting started or you need a really good foundation for story structure and plot, then I think the chapters from Story Engineering are really, really strong. Just a really nice breakdown of sort of how to hit the plot points that are really key in books. And then my other recommendation is just to read really widely in your genre and age category. When I started writing, I saw a quote somewhere saying that you should read 100 books that would be sort of comps to your book before you start writing. And I know that's not necessarily doable for everybody, but I do think it's a great goal. It's only by sort of knowing what's out there and reading widely that you get a feel for how words and sentences go together. So definitely just read really widely.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when people we have a lot of like intro writing classes at the library. Mm-hmm. People come to them and they say that they want to write a book, but they're not sure, if they want to write adult or young adult. And I say, what do you like to read? And they say they don't read. I don't understand.
Yeah. Or sometimes people say that they're worried about like that they would steal the ideas or that it would dampen but I find the opposite is true. Like the more I read, the more ideas are flowing in my mind. And then pretty soon, like ideas are just flowing. So yeah, read widely.
All right. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to have Kara, did you have something to add?
Oh, it was just
Sorry.
it's something that you hear a lot is people worrying that structure is going to somehow limit their creativity, and I just strongly disagree with that. So yes, I just wanted to say, yeah, learn about structure. It's not going to make you less creative. It's not going to make your book less original.
And once you know it, it just becomes organic to the process. You just weave it into your writing.
Yeah.
It will make your book make sense.
All right, so I'm going to have each of the mentors just let us know where we can find you online, and also if you have anything coming up that you want to tell us about, like a book coming out or a giveaway or something that you're doing, a post or a video or something like that. And we'll start with Jessica and we'll go through.
You can find me online at jessicavitalis.com is my website, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram as well, and I have lots of exciting stuff in the works, but nothing that I can talk about, so I'll pass it on to Jennifer.
I am on Twitter at it's Jenny L. Brown, but it's is part of my handle. That confuses people. It's also my Instagram. I just had to look up what my blog is, so that's bad. It's jlbwrites.wordpress.com. I also have some fun stuff in the works, and I can't say anything to anybody. So I'm very excited to be here. And I guess what's coming up for me is reading Pitchwars subs next week, and I'm so excited.
I can be found online. My website's miratrahan.com, and I'm also on Twitter at WriteMira, and to clarify, that's WRITE, not bad politics. So, but Write Mira, and the thing I'm looking forward to the most is just reading Pitchwars subs.
Yeah, so you can find me at karasutton.com. My co-mentor is graciekim.com. We're on Twitter usually. I'm at Karadactyl. So KARAHDACTYL. Yes, most of my social media handles are me making puns with my own name. You'll find Gracie at Twitter at Gracie Kim. And yeah, I think Gracie and I both had our debut middle grade books announced in the last 2 weeks, which was extraordinarily timed. So we're definitely looking forward to being able to share more about the books that we've just announced. But then also just reading Pitchwars subs. Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited.
You can find me at laceylittle.com, LACEE. And I'm also on Twitter at LaceyLH. And my co-mentor, Bronwyn, is at bronwynclarkbooks.com. And I don't have a book coming out, but my BFF, Juliana Brandt, does. It's called The Wolf of Cape Finn, so add it on Goodreads. So that's probably what I'm the most excited about in publishing world. But yes, I'm also very, 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 very excited about reading y'all subs next week. I have a countdown on my phone. I'm that excited.
Jennifer,
Can I add a thing? I'm the worst co-mentor ever. Kim Long, who is my co-mentor, and an awesome lady who is kimlongauthor.com, has her debut novel coming out on October 1st. It's called Lexi McGill and the Teleportation Tournament. It is great. I am going to Chicago to her debut launch party, and I'm so excited. But I felt like I would be super remiss not to mention that. I think I pre-ordered a bunch of copies because I always forget when I pre-order things. You should do that too.
All right, so now I'm the worst co-mentor ever. So I'm mentoring with the fantastic Julie Arts. Her Twitter handle is, I believe, at Julie Arts, and I don't know her website address, but if you go to my website, I have a link to hers. So go look her up. She's awesome.
Okay, and if we're doing the co-mentoring thing, my co-mentor is Maria Fraser, who I think her Twitter handle is KMariaWrites, and you can also find her at mariafraser.com. And she asks wonderful mentor chat questions, and look her up too.
All right. So I'm Sarah Nicolas. You can find me at sarahnicolas.com, or you can find me at Sarah_Nicolas. So if you just put an underscore right there, That's my Twitter handle, and this is my YouTube channel. So if you want to see upcoming videos, make sure you subscribe. I'm launching a new project October 12th that I'm getting very close to being able to tell people about. And Brenda Drake, who's the founder of pitchwars, and Kelly Garrett, who was the managing director last year, are both kind of helping me start it off. So make sure you subscribe and hit the little bell so you get notifications whenever I'm able to share more info about that. I am going to put the upcoming Twitter Ask Mentor chats up on the screen while we get our mentors signed off. So I just want to say thank you all for joining us. Thank you for asking questions. Without your questions, we don't really have much to talk about. So we always appreciate your questions. And we will see you when submissions open on Wednesday. All right, so on the screen we have the upcoming Ask Mentor chats. There is one on Sunday for young adult authors or mentors. There is one on Monday for the adult mentors who are mentoring mystery and thriller. And then on the 24th, which is actually my birthday, we are going to have a kind of free-for-all mentor chat that's going to be pretty much everyone who wants to do it can do it. So we have, I think, 55 mentors at this time signed up to answer questions on the 24th. So make sure you join us for that on Twitter. And the way you join that is you just go to Twitter and type in hashtag AskMentor and in the search window and hit latest, and you can follow along the chat. That's 8 p.m. All times on the screen are in Eastern. If you missed some of the previous mentor video chats and you want to make sure you catch up on those, there is a playlist available at bit.ly/pitchwarslive. So you can go to there and you can see all the previous video chats. All right, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope some of the mentors answered the questions that you are really wanting to know the answers to. And if not, you can find them on Twitter. I think they're all pretty much open to answering questions on Twitter. Just make sure to @ them and not DM them unless they have specifically said that it is okay for you to DM them. Thank y'all for joining us, and have a good night.